That's it? What do you mean? That's your emotionally scarring backstory? That's your great tragedy?
So, does anyone remember Transformers 1? Of course not. You went to see Moana 2 instead, you corporate tools. It was a movie released last year in September 2024 by Paramount Pictures, giving us a different kind of spin on the origin of Cybertron. In spite of its underperformance at the box office, it was critically acclaimed for its superb story, thrilling action, and its very compelling character writing. I'm sure some of you are expecting me to do a big review of this movie, but I figured that might be too predictable. It's pretty commonly known by now that it's a great movie, at least among those who saw it, and it is disappointing that it underperformed at the box office in favor of the Disney-branded slop. So what? Am I gonna compare it to Moana 2? Well, no, because it really wouldn't make sense to compare it to Transformers 1. They both tell drastically different types of stories with widely different character arcs and ideas, so it'd be a real stretch to compare them. But there is another piece of Disney-branded slop that came out that year that I can compare Transformers 1 to. A movie that miserably fails to tell the origin story of two beloved childhood characters and explore how one became a hero while the other became a villain. A movie that, in spite of being terrible in every way, still made a bunch of money because of the stupid fucks of America who would rather give their money to Hollywood's toxic live-action remake culture instead of something that's actually good and worth people's time. A movie that goes by the name of Mufasa The Lion King.
Hakuna Mufasa, what a wonderful name.
Hakuna Mufasa, he ain't no passing craze.
Shut up!
For those who don't remember, I've talked about this movie at least a few times before. I first covered it in my top 10 worst things in 2024, where it marginally lost the title a worst spot to Velma, and I covered it again in my ranking of the Disney live-action remakes, going into a bit more detail about its shitty writing and attempt to give Scar a tragic backstory. It always felt like something that was meant to have its own review, but I saw Sonic the Hedgehog 3 instead and wasn't able to cover it on time. But now that some time has passed, I think it's possible for me to talk about it in more depth. And I think it really helps to better understand why it's so terrible by comparing it to another movie that tells a similar story but correctly. Transformers 1 succeeds in about every avenue that Mufasa the Lion King fails. The story, characters, pacing, comedy, respect towards the source material, and how it presents itself as a prequel. The idea is actually pretty unique for Transformers. In this continuity, Optimus and Megatron are miners assigned to dig up Energon, which is used to fuel their planet. Optimus is in search of an artifact called the Matrix of Leadership, which here is believed to be an infinite source of energy. But the big twist is that their leader, Sentinel Prime, sold them out to their enemy and enforced an oppressive system for his own benefit. As our heroes go in search for the Matrix of Leadership, they end up discovering the truth about Sentinel's betrayal, which particularly ends up upsetting Megatron. Now it's a race to reveal the truth and free Cybertron from the Quintessons. Unfortunately, along the way, Megatron ends up going down a dark path which will eventually transform him and Optimus into the arch-enemies that we've come to know. In my previous video, I talked about the importance of original content and how we should support it in favor of the suffocating remake and sequel culture Hollywood has been enforcing for the last 20 years. And you might be wondering how Transformers 1 is any different if it's based on a previously established IP. It's because the movie does something refreshing with the source material. It offers a different interpretation on the origin of the characters that's unique without alienating fans who are familiar with it. The plot about rising and uniting against your oppressors mixed with a deteriorating brotherhood between the two main characters tells a story all its own, and it maintains the core aspects that Transformers is known for. But how exactly does it compare to Mufasa the Lion King? Well, there's actually a lot of things that can be compared between the two, but I want this video to focus on the most important aspect of comparison, the chemistry and development of its two main characters. It's really easy to talk about how Transformers 1 has better story pacing and comedy, but talking about the main leads is more interesting because there's a lot more to unpack, and that's mostly contributed to how both movies present themselves as an origin story. Mufasa the Lion King is awful at this. It is actually one of the most horrific accomplishments in prequel writing ever made. So much of the events and dialogue are shoehorned in order to match the continuity of the original movie. Like, it feels as if they wanted to tell a more original story but placed themselves into a corner by making it a prequel to a pre-existing film. Taka getting his scar, the name change, the formation of Pride Rock, Rafiki's fucking stick, the backstory on how the gang met up, Mufasa and Sarabi falling in love, Mufasa becoming king of a land he inhabited for like 10 minutes before his election. Every single one of these elements is painfully rushed. They couldn't think of a more creative way to set them up and just crammed them into a 50-minute time lapse. It honestly feels like they were all supposed to have their own short film to flesh them out better, instead of having them all piled together in the same story. And what makes it even worse is that so much of it is literally littered with blatant fan service that serves no purpose except member berries. They are constantly making references to the animated movies with things like The Circle of Life or He Lives in You, or Timon and Pumbaa constantly interrupting the movie with wacky hijinks, constantly over-relying on nostalgia for these films to get a reaction from the audience. They even had to go so far as to reference that scene, the one where Scar claws at Mufasa's paws before throwing him into the wildebeest stampede. Oh, and they don't just reference this once, they reference this twice. And the movie is so in your face about what it's trying to do with these scenes, with the way they're shot with these unneeded zoom-ins and over-dramatic angles, with the director going, "Oh look, it's a scene that we made for the prequel that looks like that scene from the original. Oh, look at my ingenious foreshadowing. It's just like when Scar killed Mufasa, but in reverse, because in this scene, Scar is saving Mufasa instead of killing him, foreshadowing their ominous future and his turn to villainy. Aren't I such a brilliant film director?" Into a megaphone. It all feels like content that was made to cater specifically to retards who have never mentally matured past middle school. The desperation to get people to clap at these scenes specifically for reminding them of the original animated films is so blatant and lacking in any sort of subtlety. And it could have been avoided if they weren't so desperately trying to tie this into the original film. This is something Transformers 1 doesn't have to worry about because it establishes its own continuity, separating itself from other iterations of the franchise. Instead of desperately trying to tie itself into a previously established film series or TV adaptation, it focuses on telling its own story. There are the occasional iconic lines like "Roll Out" and "All Are One," but they're not nearly as pretentious as that might sound. Every event is naturally woven into the narrative and serves a purpose in forwarding the characters and their relationships. There's a much more authentic establishment in how Optimus meets Bumblebee, or how he forms a camaraderie with Alita. A really clever and tragic one is how it gives the origin to the symbol of the Decepticons. In this continuity, the Primes are hailed as legendary heroes and a symbol of hope for Cybertron, and they're a huge inspiration to Megatron. As a token of their friendship, Optimus gives him a collector's item featuring the greatest Prime, Megatronus. And at the end of the movie, after Megatron turns to the side of evil, he uses that token of a broken friendship as a symbol for his new regime. It's actually really sad when you think about it. In a lot of other continuities, Megatronus was actually a villain, but in this continuity he was a hero, and he was also a symbol of inspiration for Megatron. So seeing his face being used by the Decepticons becomes a lot more potent when you consider the parallels behind it. And unlike Mufasa, which is constantly shoving it in your face, Transformers 1 doesn't take it and make it desperately cringy. The director isn't going, "Oh look, the symbol of the Decepticons is being shown as a symbol of friendship, but later it's gonna be a symbol of tyranny. Look at my brilliant foreshadowing," into a megaphone. It's played out as a genuine scene that's being used to establish the brotherhood between the main leads. Anything in the movie that's a reference or a tie-in to the rest of the Transformers franchise is never over-explained to the point of being pretentious. It pays proper respect to all these things and uses them as a purposeful framing device for the story. It's not shameless fan service like Mufasa's constantly doing. It's done in a way where they genuinely wanted to tell a story with the setting and characters. The best element of it easily being the relationship between Optimus Prime and Megatron, that starts hopeful but slowly falls apart throughout the movie. It's incredibly well done as opposed to shoehorned and forced as it's done with Mufasa and Taka. Their development as brothers is completely rushed because it all happens within 5 minutes of them meeting each other. Taka randomly saves Mufasa from some crocodiles and then just starts acting like they're best friends. Even before the race where Taka lets Mufasa win, he's all cheerful and excited about them being brothers. They sing that dumb song about being brothers when they never did anything to resemble being brothers. Then they miraculously time jump to them as young adults before actually forwarding their relationship. There's no proper focus on how Mufasa and Taka form their special bond, which weakens the tension of knowing they become enemies. And you can't even use the old "it happened off-screen" excuse to defend this, because Mufasa was forced to spend most of his time with the females because the asshole father said so. They don't even actually grow up together, so how do they form this unbreakable kinship? How much time do they actually spend together before their mom sends them to find Milele? Not only does it weaken the impact of Taka's eventual betrayal, but it also makes Mufasa's character extremely flat. His character has no internal conflict, and the thing that causes Scar to resent him wasn't even his fault. It was because of Sarabi hitting on him. He never struggles with anything except looking for his missing parents, which isn't even used to forward his character. They didn't even get the Scar on Scar right. Taka randomly decides to stop the white guy from killing Mufasa even though he has no real agency to do so, and this results in the scar over his eye. Now the scar is supposed to be a symbol of self-sacrifice, but this fact is never acknowledged by any of the characters. No one points out the scar, Mufasa doesn't have a talk with Taka about betraying him, Mufasa doesn't acknowledge how Taka risked his life to save him, they just randomly decide to call him Scar from now on because, oh well, it's a prequel so we have to align with the continuity of the original film. It would have been more interesting if Mufasa gave Taka the scar as a punishment for his betrayal. It would have been more personal and at least given a little more sense to his turn to villainy. But no, Taka gets the scar from some random no-name villain they have no connection with that no one cares about because everything about the third act in this movie is completely rushed. There's no sincere build-up to the scar. It's just randomly thrown in as part of the movie's problem with over-explaining every single thing from the original movie. In comparison, Optimus and Megatron's brotherhood is actually genuine and tragic. Instead of having the two meet up randomly and then time skip into the future, the movie places us in a point in time where they've been friends for years. The two of them already start off very chill with a genuine friendship, which provides the writers with more time to focus on their characters and how their friendship fell apart. We actually see Optimus, or Orion Pax, as a pretty flawed and absent-minded person, getting himself and Megatron into trouble for his own fun. Due to his free-spirited nature, he tends to neglect Megatron's, or D16's, point of view. Throughout the video I've been referring to these two by their official names, but for this portion and for context it's important to refer to them by their old names until later. Orion tends to disregard D16's point of view and properly take his feelings on certain situations into consideration. It doesn't really make him a bad friend. If anything, Orion is shown to actually be a very good and honest friend in spite of his antics. What he wants is to prove to the class system that the cogless bots can be just as capable as the Transformers. And he wants to share the benefit of his antics with his people. He wants to help motivate and inspire the other miners as well as D16. He wants to raise their spirits and make their lives in the mines more hopeful and less dour. The problem is that his tendency to break protocol usually results in the people around him getting in trouble. He gets Elita demoted, he gets himself and D16 thrown down to level 50, and he gets D16 punched in the face for trying to be a smart aleck towards Darkwing. Orion's blind optimism is actually very important to the story as it's the thing that directly sets the heroes on their quest where they learn about Sentinel's betrayal. Elita even acknowledges this and says it's something they need more of in their bleak situation, but he tends to be oblivious to how it affects those around him, which leads to the rifts in his relationship with others. In spite of having clear physical evidence concerning the matrix of leadership, Elita doesn't want to chance it because Orion already got her demoted once. It's only when he starts to grow and show a more responsible personality that she starts to confide in him, something he unfortunately couldn't do with D16 because he was too focused on revenge. He notices his friend becoming more violent and actually tries to take it more seriously, even trying to calm him down before getting kidnapped by the High Guard. After the truth is revealed to him, Orion starts to see things on a bigger picture and recognizes what's at stake. He starts to approach the situation in a more level-headed way because he knows that being brash won't get them anywhere. And when he returns with the truth, he shows his fellow miners how he's become more aware of the world around him. He knows that he used to get people in trouble because he wasn't a model citizen, and the first steps he's taking as a new bot is showing them his self-reflection. Unlike Mufasa, Orion actually evolves as a character in his movie. He actually has a number of internal struggles and issues to overcome, and after maturing past them, he starts to become Optimus Prime, eventually being deemed worthy of the matrix of leadership. He actually becomes a good leader who helps others bring out the best in themselves and stood for a new age where people have the freedom to make their own choice. That's a really huge leap from where he started at the beginning of the movie, not compelling in others while dragging them into his antics. It really feels like he became a completely different person by the end of the movie. His character evolves and endures through a lot of stuff in the movie and learns to be less naive and recognize the consequences of his actions. There's a proper build-up and introduction to his leadership skills, with the movie using people's familiarity with the IP in a properly restrained way. It also does a good job in adding layers to his relationship with D16. Transformers 1 is partially a cautionary tale about how corrupt systems of government can create monsters worse than them. Orion and D16 represent two sides of the same corruption where one wants to fix things while the other wants to burn it all down. Orion wants to help the miners by offering them a choice to have freedom, and they realize they don't simply want a new leader to take over after Sentinel. They want someone selfless to follow who will replace the system with a new one that doesn't discriminate. D16 takes a more extreme approach. After killing Sentinel, he inspires the High Guard and other victims of Sentinel's oppression to rise in arms and destroy everything he built. And this is where the movie really gets interesting, because the story is framed in a way where, regardless of the extremes, D16 is completely justified in his actions and how he feels. He's a victim of a system that oppressed him for hundreds of years and exploited him for the self-gain of a backstabbing piece of shit. What makes it even worse is that D spent his entire life idolizing the Primes, so learning the truth about Sentinel is nothing short of a deep-seated betrayal. Something in him starts to stir. The realization that his entire life was stolen from him as his grip on reality begins to crumble. D16 was a true believer in the system. Stick to the rules and you'll succeed. Trust your leader because he's making sacrifices for the good of all. But none of it was real. He believed in and lived for a lie. That's actually really traumatic, especially for someone who was directly oppressed by that system. It also explains why he was upset with Orion for showing the truth, because a part of him felt like living that lie was a better alternative to having his reality crushed. His transformation into Megatron is actually a coping mechanism, something he thought he needed to prevent another feeling of betrayal and leaving himself vulnerable. It's also why he lets go of Orion. By doing so, he let go of the only weakness he had left because he couldn't take any chances of being betrayed again. The beginning of the movie establishes a rich history between the two by showing how they interact with each other and how everyone on Cybertron is familiar with Orion's antics. So the relationship between the two is given proper groundwork before falling apart. Even when they were minors, it's clear that their behaviors and beliefs ended up reflecting their later turn to Optimus Prime and Megatron. Orion was more rebellious and believed in freedom, which reflects Optimus's drive to do the right thing. D16 was more strict and believed in order and trusting authority, which reflects Megatron's desire for power and to enforce justice against false idols like Sentinel. He views Optimus as a false idol for following in the footsteps of the Primes who deceived him, when the irony is that he just takes Sentinel's place as the new villain. There's also several external factors that influence D's growing anger, such as the High Guard's belief in strength and power overthrowing Sentinel. There's also the scene of D16 blaming Orion that I mentioned before. It's him trying to cope with the fact that his precious system that he cherished and took pride in has betrayed and enslaved him. But then he realizes directing his anger at Orion won't solve the issue because of how Sentinel will keep enslaving him. So when Orion keeps pushing back, he finally snaps and lets his long repressed anger explode in one furious and hateful shouting of,
No, I want to kill him!
That's a very important factor in this comparison between Transformers 1 and Mufasa The Lion King. D16's turn to villainy isn't the result of some random thing that happens in the third act. It's a culmination of different events scattered throughout the movie. The most important thing about this origin story is how it shows that D16 has different motivations and goals compared to other versions of Megatron. He doesn't start off with a lust for power, and he's not motivated by greed. He starts off as a slave who doesn't realize it while placing his faith in the system. You see how he was actually happy with his life as a miner because he thought it gave him purpose. But when he finds out the truth, he's absolutely mortified by how he and his fellow miners were used. They were all worked to death for a false leader who killed his idols and sold out his entire race for his own personal gain. He's a victim, and you want to see him receive justice and revenge from his oppressor. He was naive and played for a fool, and he was afraid that simply exposing the truth wouldn't be enough to stop him. Remember that Sentinel has been ruling over Cybertron for so long that is what has become the status quo. Even with the evidence, he could just claim that it's a fabrication and people would believe him. The only way to definitively prove his deception was to get him to confess to it, which wasn't a guaranteed method for exposing the truth. That's why it's logical that D16 comes to the conclusion that killing Sentinel is the only way to end his tyranny, because the only way to end tyranny is to remove its tongue. With the amount of time D16 spends idolizing Sentinel, it makes the weight of the realization even more painful for him. And not just the fact Sentinel used him, but that he killed his true idol Megatronus. D16 looked up to him as a hero, the greatest of all the Primes. And when he sees his corpse left to rot and decay because of Sentinel, you see a hint of grief on his face before it transforms into anger towards him. Remember how I said Megatronus was a good guy in this continuity, and the parallel that came with D16 making him the symbol of the Decepticons? In spite of all his resentment towards Sentinel and even Optimus, his faith in Megatronus wasn't entirely diminished. He still looked up to him as what a Cybertronian should be, powerful and an opposing force to tyranny and deception, which he sees in Sentinel and Optimus. Everything about his turn to Megatron felt personal because he felt the most personally offended by Sentinel's actions out of everyone in the movie. He was actually so enraged that he would rather die than continue to live under that leadership. He stood in defiance against Sentinel in his tower because he was ready to die for his new philosophy. This was his full transformation into a different person than how he started at the beginning of the movie. It's a newfound commitment to take his life into his own hands, never allowing anyone else to ever again influence his actions. He's not letting someone's leadership dictate his life anymore, including Orion's. And standing up to Sentinel was his first big step towards that path that he set for himself. It's why his eyes fully turn red when he fully commits to that philosophy and decides to drop Orion. This was his final step in taking his life into his own hands, no longer bearing the burden of someone else's actions. He needs to let go of the past and sever this bond tying him to it if he's going to seize his own future. It honestly reminds me a lot of Anakin from Star Wars, a fallen hero betrayed by a system and people they trusted until they were manipulated and corrupted by hate. D letting go of Orion could be a mix of him saying to himself, what have I done, and I did what I had to do. He feels bad about attacking his old friend, but comes to realize that he can't hold on to that friendship anymore if he's going to control his own destiny. And an interesting thing about it is that up to a certain point, D isn't even doing anything villainous. Claiming he wants to kill Sentinel, killing one of his spies, his claim to never trust another leader again, his fight with Shockwave, his rallying of the High Guard after unleashing his cannon, and even his first attempt to kill Sentinel when Orion tries to stop him. No matter what sacrifice he has to make, D16 won't allow himself to feel powerless, which is actually really understandable considering he's a slave. When you're powerless your entire life and only know what those above you have told you, you start believing it. You actually start defending it until there's nothing left. And that's what happened to D. He tried to stick with the system even though he knew how strict and unrelenting it was. Him and Orion were abused on a daily basis, verbally by their superiors and constantly being oppressed. While Orion was determined to strive for more, D resigned and tried to reason with himself. Cold logic is actually a form of coping mechanism in itself. You rationalize your situation even though it's twisted, and when the breaking point arrives it has a violent aftermath. When it got to the point that D could no longer deny the physical evidence, his grip on reality was shattered. He wasn't just betrayed by Sentinel or the system, he was also betrayed by himself, constantly rationalizing his situation instead of seeking optimistic escapism like Orion did. A slave being tricked into justifying their own oppression is really horrifying, to the point that it's a miracle that D was able to break free from the brainwashing. D wanted to do something about it but couldn't because he knew how powerless he was without a cog, resulting in his growing frustration and anger. And that's when power was given to him, the cogs of the fallen primes, the instrument he needed to exact his revenge. D is actually a perfect representation of a victim because his situation prevented him from acknowledging he was one. He rationalized the propaganda in his mind and believed it, and it also makes him an ideal revolutionary because he recognizes the pain of having chains around you without knowing it, and he believes it's his duty to make others see they did the same thing. It's why his first act as Megatron is to tear down the establishment. Destroying everything Sentinel built would break his hold on everyone he enslaved. The reason why none of these things are acts of villainy is because D had the same goal as Orion. He just had a more violent and heavy-handed approach towards enacting justice on his oppressor. They both wanted the same thing but had conflicting ideologies, which is where the ripple in their friendship was formed. Even the whole "I'm done saving you" moment when seen from D's perspective isn't an act of villainy. It was letting go of the mindset that prevented him from enacting justice on Sentinel, to not let himself be manipulated by the ideology of another person. The mindset that resulted in him being enslaved for hundreds of years. The movie does a really good job showing different kinds of villains and why they turned out the way they did. Sentinel started a cycle of pain and violence which blew up in his face and ruined Cybertron's future in the long run. And D16 continued the cycle after he was given a chance to start anew. And it works because D16's anger wasn't only justified, it was legitimate. D16 was betrayed and harmed in every possible way by an oppressive society, and the way he processes it is that he's alone in it. He doesn't just not trust leaders anymore, he doesn't trust anyone. All he sees now is a boot on him, and everything he does is to push that boot off. He was a genuinely good person who was lost to violence, then disconnection. And there were a lot of missed chances to remind him he wasn't the only one who deserved justice, but he could also seek it together with others. Every time Orion tries to reach out to D, something happens to separate them. Sentinel spies, the High Guard, Starscream, outside forces that are constantly keeping him from just having a moment to talk things out with D. But when you think about it, this was something that Orion needed because it shows the rapid change that D was going through after he received power. It's a way of showing how the situation could have been avoided, but it also shows how quickly D was corrupted and how he was no longer the same person Orion could simply reason with. In a way, you want to see D be saved and prevented from turning into Megatron because he doesn't deserve that. He was clearly a victim suffering from trauma and needed something to pull him out of it, but a cruel twist of fate kept him separated from the proper support he needed, further showing how Megatron is a product of the corrupt system he was born into. The avoidability of this is best shown when you compare him with Alita, who was also exploited for Sentinel's personal gain. The difference is that Alita was given better opportunities to properly process the truth. At the end of the movie, she doesn't join D16 in destroying everything because her anger and rage wasn't left to fester. Sentinel is now dead. Everyone knows the truth. Everyone, including the bots with cogs, dislike him and everything he did. But D continues to rage, to destroy everything regardless if it hurts the cogless miners. Alita exists to show how D had a choice to do good but turned evil anyway, to become a violent revolutionary. It's a way of showing how the ones mainly responsible for his transformation into Megatron are Sentinel and D himself. But because of everything that happened in the movie, it was logical for D to make that choice. Him transforming into Megatron was him trying to lead the High Guard to topple the regime and destroy their oppressor. At the end of the movie, he's still a beaten down rebel trying to rise against an unjust system. The movie does a great job showing the political path that took him from enslaved miner to political agitator to warlord, while recontextualizing it to be more suited for an animated movie meant to be viewed by kids. It shows a lighter but still straightforward depiction of this type of corruption, making it a well thought out adaptation of the source material. This might be my favorite version of Megatron because he's far more than just a power-hungry tyrant who wants to rule the universe. He actually had a noble ambition, but his anger caused him to take it the wrong way. You can always see where he's coming from throughout the movie. The fear of his enslavement that built into hate. The fear that he would fall for more lies and follow another false leader after Sentinel was gone. He's a direct product of Sentinel's deeds, who was a genuinely hardworking and nice person before he found out his entire life was a lie. That need for vengeance came from his own pain, which eventually led him to turning out the way he did. D16 turned Megatron isn't even the villain of the movie. He's a result of the actions of the actual villain. And in a smaller way, he's also the result of Orion's actions. Now, this isn't me saying Orion was in the wrong or did anything bad. He did what was best not just for himself and Dee, but for all the cogless bots, and his character learns to be less naive and recognize the bigger picture at the end. So what was it about Orion that could have contributed to Dee's transformation? It's not so much that he was a bad friend, but that he failed to recognize the actual issue. He sees that Sentinel is an evil backstabber who enslaved everyone, but he doesn't think about how this realization affected the people he oppressed, like D16. Of course he's gonna be filled with hate and a need for revenge, because he just found out his entire existence was a hollow lie and his idol saw him as a disposable resource. But Orion isn't thinking about how he feels or how Sentinel's oppression affected him. All he's thinking about is whether or not his friend will end up quote-unquote doing the right thing. In all the instances he's checking on his friend, he only sees how he's being corrupted by power. He never stops to think about why he's acting so angry and frustrated. It's because of the unjust system built on lies and the deaths of innocent people. A system that was made to exploit him. A system he foolishly believed in only for the horror of the undeniable truth to crush him. And it all comes to a head when Orion tells him,
"We're better than this. Don't be like Sentinel."
Now what Orion means by that is understandable. He doesn't want his friend to be consumed by hate and rage. But that was the absolute worst way he could have possibly worded it. He says, "Don't be like Sentinel," which is literally comparing a slave to the person who enslaved them. D16 isn't being like Sentinel because Sentinel only cared about living like a king at the expense of others. D is rising against the person who enslaved everyone, delivering justice for all those years of deception and an empire built on the corpses of those he slaughtered. And for Orion to say, "Don't be like Sentinel" for rightfully wanting to kill him is a literal middle finger to one of the people he enslaved. People like to argue that D16 betrayed Orion. When you really think about it, it's the other way around. The idea that Orion is willing to protect Sentinel, a guy who definitely deserves death, over the justice that his own brother seeks, that is the betrayal. And it's also the final nail in the coffin from Dee's perspective. Orion spends a lot of the movie disregarding Dee's feelings and doing all sorts of things that get them into trouble. A lot of ridiculous stunts and reckless decisions that force Dee to deal with the consequences of Orion's actions. And stopping him from taking revenge on his oppressor, who's a pathetic coward who shoots you when your back is turned, was the last straw. When Orion denies him vengeance, it piles on top of all the other instances where he was only thinking about himself and never anyone else. At least that's how D16 perceived it. He kept pushing his boundaries past what he can handle emotionally, and having that piled on top of Sentinel's betrayal made him worse. The whole movie is blow after blow to Dee's worldview, and he's never given the time to sit down and work through what he's feeling. His eventual extremism is a factor of the system that manipulated him, but it's also a factor of Orion's negligence. Orion was trying to be a good friend and look out for Dee's morality. Dee saw it as risking his life for the scumbucket who stole their freedoms and sold out his own people. He couldn't make sense out of it, so he just snaps and decides that he's had enough of Orion's self-righteous worldview. Orion wasn't trying to protect Sentinel, he was trying to save Dee from being consumed by his rage. But again, he wasn't thinking about how to word it, which just pushed Dee further away. One important thing to note is that Orion isn't against killing because he actually does kill several of Sentinel's minions. But the difference behind it is what separates him from D16. Orion only kills as an act of self-defense, a last resort when there's no other way to protect him or his friends. In comparison, D16 actually jumps at any given chance to kill Sentinel's followers. Orion only fights when the moment calls for it, while Dee makes fighting his first option. The problem isn't that Orion doesn't have sympathy, it's that he doesn't properly understand what D16 is going through. If he did, he would have been able to stop him from becoming Megatron. By stopping Dee from killing Sentinel the way he did, it sends the message that the people Sentinel killed didn't matter, that his enslavement didn't matter. Dee was absolutely mortified by the idea of Orion protecting his oppressor, especially when Orion should feel the same way because he's also a victim. Sentinel killed millions of innocent people, so why is Orion stopping Dee as if his life is more valuable than theirs? That could be what went through his mind when he tried to stop him. It gave Dee the impression that Orion doesn't care about him or why he must kill Sentinel. "I don't care about what he did to you or how you feel after you lost everything. Killing him is wrong and makes you just as bad as him." What Orion should have done was acknowledge Dee's feelings and why he was justified in wanting to kill Sentinel, but help him calm down so he can process the situation more rationally. The thing is that when the truth was revealed, it didn't affect Orion as much because he always knew something wasn't right about the system. But Dee was very deeply affected because he believed in the lies he was taught, and finding out that it was made specifically to exploit him made him feel sick, wanting to tear it all down from his newfound anger. Orion fails to take Dee's point of view into consideration and communicate his intent, which results in Dee viewing Orion as a self-righteous pacifist, something that he had no time for when Sentinel needed to die. All of this makes the big "I'm done saving you" moment more profound. Dee might have been thinking to himself, Orion will keep trying and trying and trying to stop me, and expect me to save him when his foolishness catches up to him, just like it did now. Even here he's expecting me to save him. No more. And that's when he comes to that decision. D decides that he's done with his friend that has held him back, that has needed him to save him time and time again, because a new path was laid out for him, the path that he needed to liberate himself from his chains, the path to becoming Megatron. But little does Megatron know that Orion's act of selflessness made him worthy in the eyes of the Primes. Not by trying to protect Sentinel or even talk D into not letting go of his friend. Orion was already willing to die by throwing himself in front of the shot meant for Sentinel. What really made him worthy was his brotherhood, wanting to save Megatron from falling into darkness, not wanting to see his friend fall into that place and never come back. This brotherhood represented his compassion, his desire to fight for those who can't protect themselves, to help them fight for their freedom, because what defines a Transformer is not the cog in their chest, but the spark that resides in their core, the spark that gives them the will to make their world better. Thus, in that moment, he truly earned the mantle of Optimus Prime. It leads into the dramatic final confrontation between Optimus Prime and Megatron, which even now continues to feed into Megatron's anger. Optimus being crowned Prime doesn't only tell Megatron that the system chose to pit his friend against him, but it also tells him that in its desperation, the old system chose a weakling as its champion. At this point, Megatron has stopped caring about the Primes because his idolizing of them only caused him pain. So he sees this as another act of oppression, and now he believes that the only way to stop it is with the death of any remaining Primes. It actually shows how sad it is that he can no longer trust anyone. Orion had always been by his side, but he can no longer see that. This Megatron really is just someone drowned in despair who became deluded in the cycle of corruption. Even the name Megatron was taken by him based on his favorite Prime. He saw himself as a hero forging his own destiny after learning it was ripped away from him by Sentinel, but was sadly never able to realize that he let Sentinel turn him into the villain he was trying to stop. And so, after besting Megatron in battle, Optimus Prime banishes him, but it would not be the last time they meet, as Megatron calls on the High Guard to follow him. As Optimus Prime brings back the Matrix of Leadership to start a new age of freedom for Cybertron, Megatron waits in the wings to strike back against his former best friend, now his worst enemy. And that is what a great work of art looks like. While the idea of Optimus Prime and Megatron being old friends who eventually become enemies isn't entirely new, this movie explores it in a more significant way than we've seen previously. It's a story that, because of its framing as an origin for the characters, it's able to focus on them, as opposed to putting the Cybertron war front and center. Orion has to confront the harsh reality that he and D16 were never as similar as he once thought, and the film does a really good job showing the different paths they took. The similarities as well as the differences between them made their characters so deep and well written, it almost feels like a Shakespearean tragedy. And it also highlights the duality of their fates. Both of them eventually evolve into the people they hid on the inside, but they were awakened in different ways. D16 needed Megatron as his cog to become Megatron, while Orion didn't need the Matrix of Leadership to become Optimus Prime. He already was Optimus Prime, and in that same way, while D16 chose to become Megatron, Orion was chosen to become Optimus Prime. This was truly a captivating Transformer story, as it actually made us care about Megatron. The scene where Megatron walks away and Optimus remembers their first encounter as minors makes it more emotional and tragic that their friendship ended. Optimus still cared about D16, but D16 was no more. Only Megatron remained. A sense of nostalgia floods his mind as he thinks back to that day. And maybe there's a chance Megatron thought about it too, but any memory of that past life only causes him pain, and in order to heal he must move on from it, even if he must forget who he once was. In spite of how villainous he becomes, you still understand his anger, an anger that quietly resided in him after centuries of slavery and chains. All it took was the truth to awaken it. And now, he's ready to forge that anger into a blade, and direct it at his new enemy, an enemy that he once called brother. It's a really sad story about two victims of a corrupt system who could have remained brothers, but because of their circumstances were destined to become enemies. Two simple men who are saddened by how their friendship ended, and yet, in spite of that pain, still accepted what lied ahead of them. Now you tell me, which is a more compelling origin story for a villain? That, or getting cucked? Yeah, it's time to talk about that infamous element from the Mufasa movie. Taka's transformation into Scar is one of the most horrible and embarrassing displays of villain origin writing I've ever seen. With how heavy-handed the marketing for this movie was, I think it's safe to say that this was the selling point of the movie. A story that explores Scar's fall from grace and how he became a villain. So this is the most important aspect of the movie they need to get right. and they get it wrong in so many different ways that it's laughable. I already went over how his brotherly bond with Mufasa was really weak, but his actual villain arc is so much worse. You'd think they would come up with something more compelling for one of the most famous villains in Disney's rogues gallery. Instead, it's the most pathetic, petty thing you can imagine. It honestly would have been better if they just made him a conniving dickhead from the start. Instead, they went the route of recontextualizing the story in an attempt to make him tragic, just because they wanted to make Mufasa look like an asshole. There is nothing sympathetic about Scar's turn to villainy in this movie. For the vast majority of his screen time, Taka is absolutely nothing like the Scar we come to know, and you'd think it's because they gradually make him a villain over time. But no, it's not like that at all. He spends most of the movie being happy and cheerful and caring about his brother, never showing any signs of his villainy we're familiar with. Honestly, he's more cheerful than Mufasa, not inheriting the dickish attitude of his father and instead being excited about having a brother. It might have been one thing if this enthusiasm gradually grew out of him as he got older, only having it as a cub, but he maintains this enthusiasm as an adult. Even after the drastic time skip, he's shown to be loving towards Mufasa and valuing his relationship with him. He acts this way through over half the movie's runtime, all the way to the end of the second act, never showing a single hint to his dark side. It's the same thing they did with Maleficent. They wanted to have it both ways while making her character an anti-hero while completely neglecting any traits of her malevolence. So how is his turn to villainy supposed to be believable? They never show a reason for why he would start to resent Mufasa during those years. Is it because he started feeling jealous of Mufasa because his parents started favoring him? No, it can't be because of that, because that never happens throughout the first act. Taka's father is shown to favor his biological son all the way to his final moments, only briefly thanking Mufasa for conveniently saving his wife, and his mother is never shown to favor Mufasa over him. The reason she spent so much time with Mufasa was because the dad made him stay with the female, so that wasn't even his fault. Even after Mufasa rescues her, she never thinks less of Taka. She loves both of them equally and lets them know that just before they went to Milele. So Taka hating Mufasa for stealing his parents isn't a motivation. Is it because he got mad at Mufasa for trying to take his place as king? No, Mufasa never shows or expresses any sort of interest in being a king or any sort of leadership. Even Mufasa himself admits he'd rather Taka be king because he believes he's more fit for the position. Mufasa never does anything to Taka to threaten his position as king, so that can't be the motivation either. Is it because he blames him for the death of his parents? Well, there are two really big things wrong with that. One, Mufasa was protecting your mom from getting killed by someone who invaded your land. He was acting in self-defense. It's not Mufasa's fault the white guy decided to retaliate. And two, if you're really so upset over the death of your parents, why are you teaming up with the guy who killed them? He's the bad guy here. You're supposed to be vengeful towards him, yet you never show the slightest hint of resentment towards him after he killed your family. Or at least that's what I think he did. It was something that happened off screen, so he probably just threw them in a cave or something, I don't know. So blaming Mufasa for the death of his parents makes no sense. Don't you have any logical motivation for betraying him? Oh wait, don't tell me. Let me guess. You got mad that Sarabi wanted Mufasa instead of you. So now you're gonna betray your family and enslave the kingdom over a one-sided relationship with a woman you knew for less than 24 hours. Yeah, who wants to bet that they're actually stupid enough to make that the origin story of Scar from The Lion King? You have got to be kidding me. That's the big grand explanation for Scar's villainy in The Lion King? He teams up with the white guy after Sarabi hooked up with Mufasa? What the fuck? That's like Quasimodo teaming up with Frollo after Esmeralda hooked up with Phoebus. Taka had literally zero relationship with Sarabi. They had absolutely no chemistry with each other. He shouldn't even have any real reason to be attracted to her because she looks like any other female lion. And if they're really trying to go the route of adapting the story of the animated sequels because of Kiara and Kion appearing in this movie, Taka shouldn't even feel anything for Sarabi at all, because in that continuity he falls in love with Zira and has 2 kids with her. And if he did have a crush on her in the past, then he had to have gotten over it, otherwise Nuka wouldn't be an adult lion before the time skip. And even that doesn't align with what they're trying to do because this line of dialogue is in the 2019 movie.
Long ago, you chose Mufasa over me, but now there is a new king. So stop being so selfish.
If you're really that upset over it, then you should have talked about it with Mufasa. At least try to clear up what happened. But no, you're just gonna team up with the guy who killed your parents and kill your brother. And the catalyst for this is so painfully forced, because Sarabi didn't have any chemistry with Mufasa either. He has literally no relationship with her until they sing that song. Is it because she's just grateful to him for saving her life? Yeah, that sounds kinda sexist. You know that thing people joke about where the damsel is just a reward for the main character for rescuing her from the villain? Where she just decides she's going to be his wife despite not knowing him at all and having no prior relationship with him whatsoever?
I just saved your life.
Yeah, but I don't even know you.
I rescued you.
Yeah, but you expect... What kind of Samaritan are you? You rescued me just so you could get with me?
That's exactly what this is. Sarabi has no relationship with Mufasa, and yet she's going to be his wife because he rescued her. He doesn't even have any reason to be in love with her because he doesn't show any interest in her. They don't talk, they don't team up to do anything, they don't discuss their interests or similarities. Mufasa spends the day trying to get Taka to hook up with her, so what causes him to be in love with her? Because he smelt some flowers on her fur? Their romance is so painfully flat, and yet this is treated as the big event that kicks off Scar's turn to villainy. And you can't even make the argument that this was a dick move on Mufasa's part, because Sarabi chose him. It was her own choice to be with Mufasa. He didn't steal her from you, she just didn't want you. And the way they throw in all these other motivations during the final battle, like, you stole my parents, or you stole my destiny, is such a half-assed attempt by the writers to cover up the real reason he becomes a villain. I already went over why Mufasa didn't steal his parents and didn't steal his destiny as king, so really, Sarabi friendzoning him is the only proper motivation he has. There's no natural transition for this to work because Taka showed no elements of villainy up to that point. He doesn't have any of the traits that made Scar an iconic villain. No cunning, no schemes, no anger issues. There is absolutely no hint of villainy that connects to who he becomes in the original movie. All of the first and second act have him being a loving and cheerful brother, then he just decides to be a villain. His transformation into Scar is so drastic with no proper build-up to it. Like a completely different writer replaced the current one and just flipped the entire script on its head. And no, I am not buying that garbage where the movie goes, oh, but he came to his senses and risked his life to save Mufasa in the final battle to redeem himself. Because, well, he just goes back to wanting to kill him again at the end of the movie. So this is his reason for becoming a villain. Everything about this origin story for Scar is fruitless, rushed, and unengaging. It's the most uncreative origin story for a villain you can imagine. And because of how horrible the motivation is, it completely fails in making Scar look tragic and sympathetic. If anything, this backstory just makes him even more despicable than he already was. A petty, pathetic, ungrateful, selfish, narrow-minded incel who quite literally deserved to die. If I was Simba, I would have killed him myself and saved the hyenas the trouble. He's just that pathetic. And it's actually kinda sick that there are people who unironically look at this and go, oh, what a sad and tragic backstory. Now I understand Scar more and think his resentment towards Mufasa and Simba was justified. What the fuck is wrong with you? That backstory is pathetic. He betrayed his family, killed his brother, tried to kill his nephew, tried to sexually assault someone if you count the deleted scenes, destroyed an ecosystem, and doomed an entire kingdom to death because he didn't get Sarabi's pussy. What do you see in this that makes you feel bad for him in any capacity? Is this just another Kylo Ren scenario where you feel bad for the deranged psychopath because he's hot? This was an awful movie that tried so hard to make you feel bad for Scar but failed miserably because of how pitiful the origin actually is. And all of its other problems, from the god-awful fan service to Timon and Pumbaa being the most obnoxious shitheads on the planet, makes it even more unbearable. It truly is a disaster, and nothing short of a middle finger to the Lion King IP as a whole. Maybe there's a lot of idiots who think it's good, but they're very clearly Disney adults. And fuck Disney adults, they're not people. This comparison video was kind of interesting to make because the subject feels both heartening and disheartening at the same time. Transformers 1 is an incredible movie, one that helps breathe new life into the Transformers franchise, and seeing people still talking about it months later is a really good thing. But knowing that it bombed so horribly at the box office while Disney's garbage continues to succeed shows how much worse the industry has become in the last 10 years. People just don't seem to bother with original quality content these days, and even when a big YouTuber recommends it to people or does something to bring attention to it, they still don't bother to see it. Even when a familiar IP name like Transformers is attached to it, they'll still leave it to fail if it doesn't pander to the lowest common denominator. I mean, there's definitely other reasons for why the movie failed. There was the horrible marketing and the fatigue of the series that occurred as a result of Michael Bay shoving his awful movies down people's throats. But it's also the fault of the stupid morons who don't bother to watch original content and have fallen into complacency with the disposable Disney licensed garbage the company puts out every month. I hear that there's original movies like Sinners doing okay at the box office lately, but they're clearly not selling as many tickets as Disney's disposable garbage. In my previous video I talked about Hollywood's toxic sequel and remake culture weeding out original content with actual value. But this is something that can easily stop if people just, you know, stop giving these movies money and positive reception. It's not that hard. A movie ticket costs exactly the same regardless if you're going to see a good one or a bad one. And it's not like the video game industry's increasingly predatory business model where you have to pay the price of a grocery bill to buy one game. It's like $10, $5 if you go on a Tuesday, so what's the deal? Realistically, all I can do is tell anyone watching this video to go watch these movies, but at this point it feels like YouTubers are doing more to promote these movies than the actual companies. Unfortunately, it's too late for Transformers 1 as its box office run has long since passed, but it doesn't always have to be about that. Maybe just watch the movie online somewhere and spread awareness for it. Maybe purchase it on Blu-ray and DVD. Something to acknowledge the effort that went into this movie. Transformers 1 was really done dirty by Paramount, and I know people are sad about it not receiving a sequel, but maybe it's best that Transformers 1 is a one-and-done thing. Its framing as an origin story for the Transformers universe is honestly so perfect that I really can't think of any sort of sequel adding to it. Maybe we can see Transformers 1 and then imagine it being a prequel to something like Transformers Prime, or even the original 80s cartoon. Honestly, that's the beauty of Transformers 1. Its take on the origin of Cybertron, Optimus Prime, and Megatron is so rich that you could fit it with almost any other iteration of the series. It's a great movie that doesn't simply use an established IP to tell a story. It's a movie that explores corruption, revolution, and broken friendships while creatively using Transformers characters to tell that story. It's a movie that deserves more love, something where you can truly feel immersed in how brilliant and captivating its world, characters, and storylines are. So if you're watching this video, go see Transformers 1. It's a refreshing experience and a guaranteed fun time for Transformers fans and just moviegoers in general. A movie that might have failed financially, but certainly didn't fail at being worthy of praise.